But the thing that really drives me crazy, okay, about when people do that is the problem I don't like it when Peterson does it is he only does it on certain topics.
Oh yeah.
Because when we talk about did the Jews leave Egypt? Well, that's a question that, you know, could be endlessly pontificate upon, consider.
It's like
but when we ask about
more
like,
complicated than like you could possibly imagine, you know.
So wait. So but how does a guy who cannot even begin to come close to the horizon of declaring a material factor or not have such a strong position on the efficacy of vaccines or the threat of climate change? Like, are you hungry for anything? I'm implying like 50 different things for that. Like if I were to walk into a room and say like, hey, are you hungry? And you were to say like, I am pretty hungry. And then I would just walk out and not talk to you.
And if I said to Jordan Peterson, well, like, what do you mean woman? Because like, you know, there's sort of like, I mean, you could say it's like biological sex, but then then he would probably be like, oh, you know, up yours, woke moralists.
Yeah.
Like we know what a woman is, and suddenly the language would become a lot more precise. I suspect, again, I don't know.
That's a good point. I should have brought that up
here.
That's true.
You know,
what does it mean when somebody's walking out of Egypt? Well, that's an incredibly. What is a woman?
Well,
an adult female with human reproductive gametes. It's like, oh,
come on,
we became very, very concise, very quickly.
Yeah. The thing that Peterson does, it's like we've come back to this 3 times now. I don't mind you doing it, just
be aware of it.
Notice that you're doing it, right? Like
he's smart enough to say that.
But that's what gets me is that I say he is smart enough to know that, like, when I was asking him about, you know, did it really happen, like with Jesus leaving the tomb and stuff, and he says, you know, well, he's often said he doesn't really like the question, or like it sort of depends. And I'm sort of like, even if that's true, even if the question is inappropriate, even if you think it misses something important, you're smart enough to know, you know what you're being asked. You know what you're being asked. And even if the answer is, I don't know, or maybe, or probably, that's why I thought about how can I, like, the main thing I did was try to make sure in that conversation that every single question I asked preempted any possible derailment,
which is impossible.
Which required watching other people ask similar kinds of questions and seeing what sort of went wrong. Where did it go? You know, like the way I ended up wording it was so that it can't be like, well, what do you mean happened? What do you mean historically? I asked the question, if I took a Panasonic video camera and put it in front of the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, would the little LCD screen show a man exiting the tomb? To which he said, I would suspect yes. And Jonathan said to me, I was kind of taken aback when he said that. Mm-hmm. And this is a man who spent probably more time talking about religion with Jordan Peterson than maybe anybody else. And he was like, when you got him to say, I would suspect yes, to the question of whether Jesus exited the tomb, suddenly he was like, I think he might believe in the historicity of that event even more than I do.
The closer you get to what's deep, the more religious and worshipful your practice.
So
and maybe you don't know what's at the bottom, but something needs to be, or you're confused.
Well, so to use your analogy then, how deep do I have to go for it to be worship? Do I have to be Catcher in the Rye? Do I have to be War and Peace? Or
it depends on what you're seeking for.
I'm seeking to know whether I worship something. You've claimed I worship something, and I want to know.
If you want to have a deep and meaningful life, then you have to go all the way to the bottom or the top, and insofar as you're capable of doing that, because otherwise you'll be fragmented and miserable and anxiety-ridden and hopeless.
So I have to worship something to have a meaningful life. And
There's no difference between those two things.
Okay.
They're the same thing.
So if I don't worship anything, my life will not be meaningful, correct?
Well, that's the definition of nihilism.
Okay. So if I'm a nihilist, I don't worship anything.
That's true. And then you...
okay. Mm-hmm. You just said everybody worships something. I think you've just agreed there is a class of people that doesn't.
Well, they're incoherent in their worship. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help. And hand gestures like that. And hand gestures like that aren't going to help. Yeah.
Okay.
Look, if you're incoherent and fragmented and aimless, which is what happens if your objects of worship are unstructured and chaotic, then you're going to be anxiety-ridden and without hope. That happens. That's a technical argument.
But there's happy nihilists.
Oh,
How do you explain that there are happy nihilists then? Because you just said they can't be.
The mere fact that you state that there are happy nihilists doesn't make it true. Like, what's your evidence? How do you measure nihilism, and how have you associated it with happiness, and what's your definition of happiness, and have you compared them to religious people? Because if you do, by the way, it's clearly the case that religious people over the long run have better mental health It's a well-documented fact in psychological literature.
Sure.
So your claim is just a claim. It doesn't stand on anything.
So you disagree with the claim that there exists even one happy nihilist?
I didn't say that.
Okay, would you agree there exists at least one happy nihilist in the universe?
It's not a question that has any meaning as far as I'm concerned, because it
Okay.
depends on what you mean by happy, and it depends on the duration that you're trying to calculate over. Now and then there's probably some deluded soul who thinks he's a nihilist who's momentarily pleased with himself. But as a long-term strategy to deal with the future, to get along with yourself and with others, it's sadly lacking. That's why Nietzsche warned that when God died, as he announced in 1850, that people would be flooded with pointless, anxiety-ridden, hopeless nihilism. And that was what would attract them for example, to the false gods of totalitarianism, which is exactly what happened, because everybody worships something, even atheists who think they don't.
Aren't there unhappy Christians or
Of course
devoted
there are.
believers? So worshiping something is neither sufficient nor necessary for happiness then?
You're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're a
'cause I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something.
Something needs to be or you're confused.
You are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a
Okay,
Christian.
I'm done.
The reason I know that is because the parameters for my resistance are quite well defined, which is we talk, we argue, we push, and then it becomes physical.
Okay, I'm done with him.
And then it becomes physical.
The word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if
What's
you
a
believe
belief?
something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't
life.
be so sure.
In some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with
I can
Christianity. with that
imagine
respect.
that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie.
So you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no. I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So
Right.
you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you like lied in that scenario. So
Not
clearly that's
without
not what
the
you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to
I
die for it.
said-
You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
And when men are talking to each other in any serious manner, that underlying threat of physicality is always there, especially if it's a real conversation, and it keeps the thing civilized to some degree. You know, if you're talking to a man,
The techniques that I would use against a man who was employing those tactics are forbidden to me. So I don't know, like, it seems to me that it